strictly music, only music and nothing else. Nobody wanna hear that shit. That is a direct quote from Jeffrey, also known as Young Thug, in regards to Gunna's last studio album underneath the YSL imprint, labeled The Last One. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you whether or not we want to hear that shit, because I went ahead and did the legwork and I listened to it, as so many of you have. And in all honesty, I think it's interesting the state that Gunna is in. There's a few points I want to touch on. I do want to give him credit for continuing to drop amidst this controversy instead of picking a hole to crawl in and kind of letting things die down, which I don't think they ever will, right? We've seen street allegations greatly influence the career of rappers because rap is so heavily tied into the streets. If you want to know my thoughts deeper on that, I do have a video on rappers and the streets being so tied together, so go ahead and feel free to check that out. I think the issue here, and one of the only issues I found with this album, outside of it being too long, which I wouldn't really say is an issue because that's more so a personal preference. I do not need a 25 track Gunna album. That's not an artist that I need that much of. But considering this is supposed to be technically his last studio album on YSL, which time will tell whether or not that is the case, because at the end of the day, politics aside, if he makes money for the label, he makes money for the label, and YSL is a label that sorely needs money made. Rest in peace to Lil Keed, and there was also some street allegations with other artists on YSL. YSL is currently in shambles. It would be a shame to let Gunna go, but Young Thug is also a phenomenal artist on his own right, and I'm sure he can shoulder the burden of the label if he chooses to. The only issue I find with Gunna and this Last One album is that it has a very somber vibe to it, which I get is in line with what's going on. This is the last one. It's supposed to be somber, but I feel he spends so much time indirectly and or directly addressing the controversy of that he had in court, or the quote unquote snitch allegations, that it takes away from a lot of the Gunna that we know and enjoy. He is on the back foot in a lot of these songs because of what's going on, and it almost sounds repetitive at times as he continues to explain himself in ways like he's just going against the grain and he's keeping his head up, and people are throwing dirt on his name, and various rappers in their opinions and quote unquote podcasting and talking on him in Clubhouse and other forums like that. He even has a song called Podcast. I'm a big Gunna fan, but I do believe Gunna does his best work when he's allowed to express himself without this controversy. And I do see other people commenting on it and giving him a lot of credit because he's so talented. I do think that credit is a bit inflated because of the controversy. Without this controversy, this would not be considered any album to talk about in reference to Gunna and his other albums. People are just glad that he's continuing to make good content and, good music. But in all, it's not better than a great many of his projects. But because it's not horrible and given the circumstance, we have to give him an extra. So it's like he's getting a boost for making not what would be considered mid, because it's not mid, but he's getting credit for making what would be considered not as good as his other bodies of work. I believe even the album before this was better, and the one before that was better, and so on and so forth. I do believe Gunna is fighting against the quote-unquote Lil Uzi effect, which I would call the Lil Uzi effect, where some of his earlier works were so much better than his current works. Gunna is continuing to make good music, and if you have a banger every now and again, you will be able to do so indefinitely and allow that song to kind of shoulder the burden like Fuck You Mean did when he first got released from jail and the allegations were at the height, right? Well, can't really say allegations because we've seen it on camera, but Fuck You Mean shouldered a lot of the burden for that album. And then it was also a good album on top of that. And then he has these songs that are pretty good and they shoulder the burden. there's no real song on this particular album that shoulders the burden of the last one. It's just decent. And Gunna is not regarded as a quote unquote decent artist. He's regarded as a great artist. So it's going to be interesting to see moving forward if he's able to keep this pace. Because it seems like if he does not have a hit, he is in trouble. It seems like everything he puts out needs to be extraordinary. And if it's not, he sinks a little deeper into the hole, right? So it's really don't touch the floor with this particular artist. These albums have to hit, they have to hit hard, and there has to be at least one or two songs on there that's going to chart relatively decent, or at least have the streets in a chokehold for a while. And I do not believe there's any song on the last one that is capable of that. So he loses a life. We'll treat it like a video game. He just lost a life. In regard to saying nobody want to hear that shit, however, I do believe we do want to hear that. But the biggest opposition to anything Gunna puts out will be how well Young Thug in his album that is coming up performs. Because I do remember the last album that Thug put out, even though he had all the support from the industry, it did not perform as well as Gunna's did. So again, Gunna bought himself a little bit more time, but it feels like he's living on borrowed time, and it's almost as if he's rapping like he's living on borrowed time. He doesn't have the same bravado, he doesn't have the same boisterous demeanor on some of his tracks. He's very somber. Seems like a guy that is fighting. Seems like he's a little war worn, excuse me, and he seems like he's on the back foot in some of these tracks. We do see classic Gunna peek out every now and again, but this is nothing like any Drip Season, Drip or Drown, or anything like that. The things that made Gunna who he is. I'm very interested to see going forward if he falls victim to his older projects being so much better than the ones that he's putting out now. The last one was a decent project. I liked the song with Burna Boy the most personally. He does have a handful of slaps on there, but out of a 25 song project, I do believe maybe 8 of those are slap worthy. I would even give the argument to 10, but I do genuinely believe it's around 8. There's not a lot of circumstances where I need a 25 track Gunna album. I think anywhere between 11 to maybe 15. No, I can't say 11 to 15. I'll say anywhere between 11 to maybe 12 actually. I don't need an extraordinarily long Gunna album. That was never an artist that I needed that much of. I think anywhere between 12. You know what? Yeah, let's do 12 to 15, maybe 16, because I do believe it was Drip or Drown that had about 16 tracks on it, with On a Mountain and Outstanding and stuff like that. I don't need a 20 plus Gunna project ever in any circumstance. I just don't believe he's an artist that does well with super massive projects. All in all, the last one, I give it maybe a 7 out of 10. I could see an argument for 7.5. You do have to give him a little credit because he is still continuing to create amidst the controversy. He's working through the disturbance. But this was kind of a little bit of a miss, in my opinion. Not because it was a bad album, but because he can't afford to have a decent album or an average album. He has to overly perform because public perception is against him. Public perception is split. And when you have public perception split like that, you have to perform above the line if you want to continue to have that notoriety. So we're gonna see how things continue to roll out as the album has just dropped. I'm sure he'll have some videos, and there'll be a bit of a label push if he still has access to that and money put into it to kind of push it over the edge numerically. So we will see the numbers correspond with this, and you know, once public perception gets a hold of the numbers, we're gonna think that the album is better than it is. But if you can just listen with your ears like we do here at Strictly Music Only Music and nothing else, because we discuss Strictly Music Only Music and nothing else, you will know that this album is not one of his best. I would actually say it's probably one of his worst, and not because it's so bad, but because it's just average. And I don't think Gunna's in a space where we need average music from him. We need a reason to rally behind Gunna. If you're a Gunna fan, you need a reason to rally behind him. And that reason would be good music, not average music. Young Thug says nobody want to hear that shit. And it is debatable whether they want to or not. You get in the comments and tell me whether or not you want to hear Gunna the Last One. I know Young Thug has also been heard on a snippet of a Little Baby song, making his comments on both Yak Gotti, a former YSL affiliate, as well as Gunna. So I do believe Young Thug will break his silence soon and begin to drop music and let us know his thoughts on the issue on wax instead of social media posts and snippets and cryptic messages and stuff like that. So I'm also looking forward to hear from Young Thug, just because I'm a Young Thug fan, but it will also shine some light and give some credence to everything that's going on behind the scenes with his label YSL, because when YSL was hot, it was hot as fish grease. So I would like to see the label be salvaged in some type of way. I know they still got Lil Goddard and a few other people over there willing to do the work, so I'm looking forward to see what the future of YSL is going to be. Strictly Music Only Music and nothing else. Gunna the Last One, I give it about a 7 out of 10. I'm prepared to take an argument for a 7.5, but no more than that. In the comments, let me know what you think. Strictly Music Only, nothing else. Get at me, dog.